I still remember that day, the bitter cold, the howling wind, and the eerie silence that followed. It wasn't the kind of silence you'd expect in the Arctic, where the wind never truly rests. No, this was different. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting, watching. Before I tell you what happened next, let me remind you, only the bravest subscribe to this channel. If you're ready for a wild adventure, hit that button and join the legends. I had been out for hours, my breath turning into thick clouds in the freezing air. The vast, endless white stretched in every direction, an unforgiving wasteland where survival was a game few could win. I was alone, at least I thought I was, until I saw it. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. A mound of snow? A trick of the light? But as I stepped closer, my chest tightened. It was a cub. A polar bear cub. It lay curled up in the snow, barely moving. Its fur, once thick and bright, was now dull, matted with ice and dirt. Its tiny ribs poked through its frail body, and its breathing was so shallow I almost couldn't see it. My heart pounded. A cub this young, alone in the Arctic? It didn't make sense. I hesitated, glancing around. There had to be a mother nearby. Polar bear mothers never leave their young, not unless something terrible has happened. And if something terrible had happened, then this cub wasn't just lost. It was abandoned. Or worse, orphaned. The wind picked up, sending a shiver down my spine. I had to think fast. If the mother was still alive, she could return at any moment. And if she thought I was a threat, well, I didn't like my odds. But if she was gone, then this cub had no chance. I knelt down slowly, careful not to startle it. "Hey, little one," my voice was barely above a whisper. No response. No movement. Just the faint rise and fall of its chest. I reached out, my gloved hand hovering inches from its body. And then, just as my fingers brushed its icy fur, a sound. Guttural. A growl. Not from the cub. From behind me. My stomach twisted into a knot. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I forced myself to stay still, breathing shallowly, listening. The growl wasn't close, not yet, but it was getting louder. Something was out there. Something big. And it wasn't happy. The growl rumbled through the frozen air, low and guttural, like a warning from the Arctic itself. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I had heard polar bears growl before, but something about this one felt wrong. It wasn't the deep, powerful sound of a mother defending her cub. It was something else, something almost unnatural. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The cub, weak as it was, suddenly stirred. A soft whimper escaped its tiny throat, barely audible over the howling wind. My heart clenched. It was still alive, but if the sound had reached whatever was lurking in the darkness, then we were both in trouble. I turned my head slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. The Arctic was a vast white wasteland, but my instincts told me something was watching. Something just beyond my field of vision. Then I saw it. A shadow. A massive, hulking figure moving between the icy ridges. My stomach dropped. It was a bear. But not just any bear. This one was wrong. Its fur was patchy and thin, barely clinging to its emaciated frame. Its movements were sluggish, almost unnatural, as if it was struggling against some unseen force. And its eyes, dark, sunken, hollow, were locked onto me. I had seen starving bears before. The Arctic was cruel and hunger was a constant battle. But this was different. It wasn't just hungry. It was desperate. The wind shifted, and in that brief moment I smelled it. Something rancid, something that didn't belong in the crisp Arctic air. Rot. Decay. I felt the ice beneath me crack as I took a step back. If this bear was sick, if it had some kind of infection, then it wasn't thinking like a normal animal anymore. It wasn't going to hunt like a polar bear. It was going to attack like a cornered beast with nothing to lose. And I was standing in its path. The cub whimpered again, this time louder. The sound made the massive bear stop, its ears twitching. For a split second, I saw something flicker in its eyes. Recognition? Confusion? Then, without warning, it lunged. I barely had time to react. My boots slid against the frozen ground as I threw myself sideways. The bear crashed into the snow where I had just been standing, its claws digging deep, sending ice and snow flying into the air. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. I had no weapon. No protection. Nothing but the bitter cold and the thin air between me and this dying beast. The bear turned toward me, slower this time, as if its own body was betraying it. It was starving, weak, but still dangerous. I risked a glance at the cub. It was barely moving. If I ran, I might survive. But the cub? It wouldn't stand a chance. The bear let out another low growl, this one weaker, almost pitiful. For the first time I noticed something else. A wound. A deep, jagged gash running down its shoulder, caked with frozen blood. It had been attacked. But by what? A polar bear could take down a seal, a human, even a wolf. But there was only one predator in the Arctic that could do this kind of damage to a full-grown bear. Another bear. A much bigger one. A chill ran through me, colder than the Arctic wind. If this bear was on the run, injured and desperate, then something worse was out there. Something that had already won the fight. And now it might be coming for us. The wind howled through the Arctic wasteland, whipping ice and snow into blinding swirls. The sick bear stood before me, panting, its sunken eyes flicking between me and the dying cub. It swayed on its feet, its massive body trembling with exhaustion. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then it took a step forward. I knew I had seconds to decide. If I ran, the cub was as good as dead. But if I stayed? I had nothing. No weapon, no cover, nothing but my own 2 hands against a starving predator. The cub let out another faint whimper. The bear's ears twitched. Its head snapped toward the sound. And then, it stopped. Its nostrils flared, sniffing the frozen air. The moment it did, something changed. The bear froze, its breathing suddenly ragged, its entire body stiffening. It wasn't looking at me anymore. It was looking past me. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at me not to turn around. I turned anyway. And what I saw nearly made my heart stop. At first, it was just a shadow shifting between the ice ridges, its massive frame blending almost perfectly with the endless white. But as the wind settled, I saw it clearly. Another bear. But not just any bear. This one was a monster. Easily twice the size of the sick bear, its fur was thick, pure white, untouched by sickness or starvation. A dominant male. The kind that ruled these lands, the kind that feared nothing. And worst of all, its eyes were locked onto us. I barely had time to react before it moved. Not slowly. Not cautiously. It charged. The sick bear let out a ragged snarl and lunged forward, not at me but at the monstrous bear. I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat. The impact was violent. Teeth, claws, blood spraying across the ice as the 2 bears collided. The sick bear was weak, but it fought like it had nothing to lose. But it wasn't enough. The monstrous bear was stronger. Much stronger. With a terrifying roar, it threw the sick bear onto the ice, its jaws snapping shut around its throat. The sick bear barely had time to struggle before. Crack. The sound echoed through the frozen air. Then, silence. The sick bear went limp. His body twitched once. And then, nothing. The monster didn't hesitate. It released the dead bear, its massive head turning toward me and the cub. I knew without a doubt what was about to happen. The cub was helpless. Weak. An easy target. And to a dominant male bear, a cub that wasn't his own wasn't just another animal, it was competition. I had heard stories before. Male polar bears don't hesitate to kill cubs. And now I was standing between one and its next victim. The cub whimpered again, weaker this time. The sound made the monstrous bear's ears flick forward. Its muscles tensed. It was about to attack. I didn't think. I just acted. With everything I had, I threw myself between the cub and the massive predator. And then, the ice beneath me shifted. At first, I thought it was my own movement. But then the crack spread. A deep, groaning rumble rolled through the ground. The ice was breaking. And we were standing right on top of it. The monstrous bear stopped. Its dark eyes flicked to the ground beneath its feet. And then, the ice collapsed. For a split second, everything went weightless. The ground beneath me vanished and a rush of freezing air sucked me down. I had only one thought as I fell. The Arctic had decided our fate. I plunged into darkness. The freezing Arctic water swallowed me whole, the shock hitting me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Every muscle in my body locked up, my lungs screaming for air, but all I could do was sink. The weight of my soaked clothes dragged me down, the cold wrapping around me like chains, pulling me into the abyss. Somewhere above, the ice was still breaking, groaning, cracking, shattering apart like fragile glass. I barely caught a glimpse of the monstrous bear, its massive form flailing as it too crashed into the icy void. But there was no time to think about it, because if I didn't act fast, I was going to die. I fought against the cold, against the crushing weight of the water. My limbs felt like lead, my body going numb too fast. The Arctic didn't kill with teeth or claws, it killed with silence, with the slow creeping of cold turning flesh to stone. I kicked hard, desperate to reach the surface. Then I saw something, movement. Not mine. Not the bear's. Something else. I barely had time to process it before a shadow rushed past me. Fast. Too fast. Panic shot through me like fire. It wasn't the bear. The massive predator was still struggling above me, its huge paws thrashing, fighting to climb onto a floating slab of ice. This was something in the water. Something big. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. The Arctic was home to more than just bears. There were things beneath the ice, things built for this world. And one of them was circling me. A shape materialized in the darkness, sleek, powerful, a killer whale. I barely had time to react before it rushed straight at me. I braced for impact, but it never came. The orca swerved at the last second, its massive body cutting through the water like a knife. But it wasn't running. It was hunting. And that's when I realized. It wasn't after me. It was after the monstrous bear. The bear, still struggling to pull itself onto the ice, didn't see it coming. Not until it was too late. The orca struck with terrifying force. Water exploded around them as the bear let out a deep, strangled roar, its massive body yanked backward into the depths. I didn't wait to see what happened next. With every ounce of strength left in me, I kicked upward, breaking through the surface with a ragged gasp. The cub. My head whipped around, scanning the floating chunks of ice. Then there. A small, shivering form clung desperately to a piece of ice not far from me. It was still alive. But so was the bear. Even as the orca dragged it down, the monstrous bear fought, clawed, and suddenly, it turned its head toward me. In that moment, I saw something in its eyes. Not fear. Not pain. Recognition. As if, somehow, it understood. And then, it was gone. The water closed over it and the Arctic swallowed it whole. Silence. For a moment, I just floated there, gasping, frozen, barely able to think. Then the cub whimpered. I forced myself to move, pushing through the freezing water toward it. My fingers were numb, my body trembling, but somehow I reached it. Somehow I pulled myself onto the ice beside it. And somehow we had survived. But the Arctic wasn't done with us yet. Because in the distance, over the howling wind, a new sound cut through the silence. A sound I never wanted to hear. Footsteps. And they weren't human. The wind howled across the frozen wasteland, but beneath it I could hear them, the footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Purposeful. Something was coming. My body was weak, my limbs trembling from the cold, but instinct forced me to act. I pulled the cub closer, my numb fingers barely registering the icy fur beneath them. The little thing was still breathing, barely. Its tiny chest rose and fell in uneven gasps, its body shuddering against mine. But it wasn't just the cold that had my heart hammering in my chest. I turned my head slowly, and what I saw made my stomach drop. There, emerging from the white abyss, was another bear. Not just any bear. A female. Her massive frame moved with a calm, deliberate grace, her thick fur untouched by scars or sickness. Her black eyes flicked between me and the cub, her breath curling into the air like smoke. I didn't move. I didn't breathe, because I knew what this meant. This was its mother. I had seen it before, how fiercely polar bears protected their young. If she thought I had taken her cub, if she thought I was a threat, I wouldn't stand a chance. The cub stirred in my arms, letting out a weak, pitiful whimper. The mother stopped. Her ears perked forward. Her nostrils flared. And then, for the longest moment, she just watched us. I held my breath. I didn't know what to do. Run. Stay still. Let the cub go? Then she moved. Not toward me. Not aggressively. But slowly. Carefully. And that's when I saw it. Her ribs. She was starving. The Arctic was cruel even to its strongest. And yet, despite her own hunger, she wasn't lunging, she wasn't attacking. She was waiting. For me to make a choice. I looked down at the cub, its eyes barely open, its tiny body trembling. And I knew. This wasn't my fight. This wasn't my world. It was hers. With shaking hands, I loosened my grip. The cub let out a tiny sound as I gently pushed it forward, toward her massive paws. For a moment, the mother didn't move. Then she stepped forward. The cub let out a soft cry and the mother answered. A deep, rumbling sound, not a growl. Something softer. Something only a mother could make. I watched, frozen in place as she nuzzled her cub, sniffing it, checking it. And then she turned her gaze back to me. For a single, terrifying second I thought it was over. But then she blinked. And in that moment something passed between us. Understanding. Gratitude. And then, just like that, she turned away. With the cub pressed against her side, she began to walk, disappearing into the white abyss as silently as she had come. I sat there, motionless, watching until she was gone. And then, finally, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. I had survived. But more importantly, so had the cub. And in the unforgiving Arctic, that was all that mattered.